I'm here at Kabafest 2018, and I got the student book grants, and I'm on the queue lining up to get my books, and I'm so excited. I'm meeting new people, and I'm making new friends.
We have lovely books here, and I'm having fun here, and I hope to be here some other time.
I can't wait to get my hands on this and start reading them.
You don't belly full. For those who didn't understand that, belly full means belly full. So we're ready for our next panel, which we're very excited about. Who's excited about this panel? That's it. How many men are excited about this panel? Let's wait. Let's give them a chance. The men who are excited about this panel, let's hear you. Well done. So the next panel is Feminism for the Future, Perception and Reality. I'm not even going to try and explain or break anything down because we all know what this is about. And I think it's going to be great fun. So I'm going to first introduce this wonderful OAP, not an old age pensioner. That's what they call them in Lagos now. Please join me in welcoming Wana Udobang. And for this super international panel, I want to invite my sister from Ghana. This woman, that's all I will say. She's fire. Her blogs have set Accra on fire before. And that fire reached us here in Lagos, and in Kaduna, and in Cross River. Very bold, very courageous, says it like it is. Please join me in welcoming Nana Darkoa. You people, you bring your Lagos behavior to this place. And my sister, this woman runs, let's see how I can describe this thing now. How many of you are on Twitter? Right. How many of you have come across Divorce Diaries? Yeah? When I was, somebody, I don't even know how I came across it. About a year ago, I sat and read the entire thread of about 50 tweets. It was a thread, and it was about this story, and I was reading this thing, and my jaw was hanging open, you know, by about 2 millimeters with every thread. It was just unbelievable, and I think what she's doing is incredible, you know, because Northern Nigerian voices, the voices of Northern Nigerian women, their stories are critical too. If we think it's just us, maybe in the Southwest or the East, our voices are incomplete without the Northern Nigerian contribution. And that woman's handle gave me that perspective. And so many ideas that we've had in putting these panels together have actually just come from her. She doesn't know. Please join me and welcome Fatima Zahra Danejo. And last but not least, you know, you always leave the big masquerade till last, right? And a lot of masquerade ship has to do with people who can give us money to do projects. So my sister that I'm inviting next, who came so highly recommended, you know, I was calling all my friends. I said, see, I need a hot woman who will come and set Kaduna ablaze, because that's what we like at Kabafest. And her name came up, and I contacted her, and she was ever so gracious. And I'm really grateful, really, really grateful. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Amina Salihu from the MacArthur Foundation. Thank you so much. You came with your bag. So yes, I'm also bringing my pockets to you. So can we test the mics, please?
Hello, hello.
Well done. Host done.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Fati?
Hello, hello. Hello, everyone. Oh, calm down. Thank you guys for the lovely welcome. I feel like I'm under a bit of pressure on this panel because everyone has been like, this feminism panel. But I will do my best. I think, of course, you know, we were talking about feminism, future, perceptions, reality. We're going to be exploring the face of feminism in the future and, you know, why it's really crucial for advancement of our community in these times as well. I will start off by asking our panelists to just tell us very quickly about what they do and the space they occupy when it comes to the feminism space.
So in terms of what I do, first of all, I define myself as a feminist activist because really feminism is the philosophy. Feminist organization, I deliberately did not say global, feminist organization called the Association for Women's Rights and Development, where I work as the Director of Information, Communications and Media. I'm a writer, I'm a blogger. I started alongside my friend Malaika Grant, a blog called Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women. And I want to emphasize that it's a community blog, so I encourage people to submit stories, and I'll be delighted to feature stories from northern Nigeria.
Okay, where do I start? I do so many things. I'm a lawyer. My practice is particularly towards gender issues, obviously. I'm one of the co-founders of Jaruma magazine, an online magazine for women. It was created to give Northern women a voice, like a platform for Northern women. And then also, I'm a producer and presenter of the BBC show Adi Kwanzamani, which is tailored towards women's issues. And of course, I write divorce diaries. I write other things, but people seem to like divorce diaries more than the other things that I write. So yes, that's what I do. And everything I do, my calling is to make sure that sisters, daughters, aunties all have better lives.
I guess I am because I'm feminist. It defines who I am, it defines what I do as a friend, as a mother, as a sister, as a breadwinner. I like to emphasize the latter a lot. I work with a grant-making organization, and I think one of my tasks is to always ask, where are the women at the table? Where are the women in the room? In my other life, I'm part of a foundation called Hadis, where we make grants to women farmers. And the first time we started that, I was told there were no women farmers. And I said, it's because you don't know where exactly you're going to look. I celebrate my friendships and the relationships that I build because that is what feminism has taught me. More importantly, it makes me a very creative person. And so I try to seize the space and to write the histories of women, because a lot of the time what you hear is the history. And so when my husband ran in 2011, I was like, I'm going to write my own story, and that's going to be the history of that. And when my grandmother passed at the age of 110, I thought I would write her story, because I thought, really, she was born feminist.
Thank you. And I think I might just have to start with Dr. Amina. Your question was going to be further down, but you just brought something up that just raises it to the top, which is you clearly know about erasure of women and erasure of feminists. And I want to talk about African, feminism and erasure. There's a lot of young feminists at the moment, and there's this impression or belief that feminists did not exist before in Africa, in Nigeria specifically as well. And I want you to just speak to that in the kind of work that speaks specifically to erasure.
And so really, when we talk about feminism as something for the future, really I'd ask myself, hasn't it always been there? Isn't it just a notion of a consciousness to name it and to claim it and to explain exactly what it means? One might need to, for example, look at the colonial history and what it's told us about women's agency and the attempt to attack that and to deny that it existed. But we've always known that our mothers have always organized. They've always resisted. Patriarchy has always been there, probably not well understood or labeled to be the barrier that it is. And so the assumption is that this thing called feminism today is a new and imported thing. I respect the need to kind of bring geopolitical dimensions to feminism because the issues that affect one part of the country might not be the priority in another. But if you look at the issues around, the right to control our bodily integrity, how many children do I have? When do I have sex or not have sex? I'm sure there's no baby in the room, yeah? Anyway, they still need to hear these things. And the fact that in marriage, you can actually negotiate. The whole perception that there cannot be marital rape. I mean, these are things that we have been grappling with. The economics of it has been more visible. So you see our sisters and our mothers running their own businesses, defining how they earn their income and what they do with their income. But the challenge has always been control of that income. And, it's not something that is limited to Africa alone. So a woman can be a very good farmer, but at the end of the day, the money of feminism, and we shouldn't deny that. I've heard some women say, I'm a womanist, I'm a gender-sensitive person. And so I take a break and I say, you know what? As a feminist, you cannot judge. You need to better understand their standpoint. And then I say, you see why I call myself a feminist? I do not agree that oppression is acceptable in any shape or form. I would not accept the oppression of a woman by another woman. I would not accept the oppression of a woman by a man, that's for sure. By a child, by an adult, I do because we're defined as girls, not because nature made us girls, but because society makes us girls and we go on to become women. And so I think the very starting point for all of us in this room, whether we name ourselves feminist or not, is to really ask ourselves the question, haven't we ever come up against oppression? Didn't we feel, being the activists and the thinkers that we are, didn't we feel some kind of angst and agency to challenge that? When we see wrong of one gender to the other, do we think that is right? Do we even think it makes sense to deny the space for one person and give the other an opportunity to be themselves just because, only because they're born of a certain sex? Not gender, but of a certain sex. So we need to bring back memory into the room and to ask ourselves, how do we begin to rethink our reality and how do we begin to document those things that we have always denied, but they've always been there?
When I walked in this morning into the room, somebody just talking about the fact that I'm doing this panel, and one of the volunteers said, "Oh, are you a feminist?" And I said, "Yes," and she covered her ears. And we proceeded into this, back and forth. And it brings me to this idea of, a feminist history in the North. And I want you to speak to that because, again, we've also pointed out through different panels here today about all the impressions of Northerners and Northern women specifically in the South and around the world. So I would like you to speak to the idea of a Northern feminist history that existed and
suppress women and their voices. But it is true that we've had a feminist history in northern Nigeria. We've had societies that were matriarchal. We've had societies that were led by women over dynasties even, such as the obvious example of Queen Amina of Zazzau. And the problem we've had, Islam is, now the culture. And I always say to people, I dare say, Lola, this is a safe space. I can say this. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Okay. I like to always say, my father used to always tell me that Islam is a feminist religion. One, because it was one of the first religions to give women property rights. And then it's also the religion that does not put a limit to where I can go as a woman. So when you compare it to northern Nigerian history, you look at scholars and thinkers like Usman bin Fodio, you look at Nana Asma'u from his daughter, and the Maguzawa community were treating their women. And, you know, he didn't like the fact that when their husbands died, they had to marry their husbands' brothers, or that they were easily divorced. And it's so interesting because in a lot of ways, we have gone back to that Maguzawa society. In Islam, when you divorce a woman, you're supposed to, the verse of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you are supposed to let them go in kindness and consideration, not what we are seeing now. And when you read those texts, you know, those texts about what Uthman bin Fodio thought of the society he thought to reform, we are back there now. So when you look at how he taught in his house, some of his wives were scholars. A lot of his daughters were scholars. Nana Asma'u is, you know, she's not celebrated in Nigeria. But I was in Kenya some time ago, and you need to see how these people were celebrating the works of Nana Asma'u. Not as a feminist anyway, but as a philosopher and as a thinker. But in our contemporary history, those things have been, to speak to what Hajia was saying, they've been erased completely from our history. So it also almost seems as if the things that we are advocating for are some new age, you know, wisdoms. And it's not true. If we are going to say that Islam is our culture, then Islam is a very kind religion to women. Because it's only in Islam that you are being paid to breastfeed. As a mother, yes, you are allowed to, your husband will pay you for breastfeeding your child. And then if it gets to the point where your marriage crashes and ends, you are supposed to be allowed to go with a sense of social security and financial stability. That's what it says. It's supposed to be, and it was. You know, it was. So also, the same Uthman bin Fodio was the one who kept saying that if you want to oppress people, you keep them in ignorance. And what he found there was that the Maguzawa community were perpetuating ignorance, particularly among women. And now we're back to that because you go to places, in my work with the BBC, I do a lot of stuff for rural women. And you go to a rural community and somebody will tell you that, oh, she didn't know that a woman could do this. The problem we have as a Muslim feminist with Western feminists is that they refuse to understand, they refuse to come with understanding of that Islam does not put a cap on where I can go as a woman. What it does is that there's an etiquette, so to speak, that I'm supposed to carry as a Muslim woman. So if I want to be an astronaut, for instance, the etiquette would be that I would be modest in my behavior, I would be modest in my interactions, I would be kind to my colleagues. Kindness is a big part of our religion. A lot of people don't know this. So when you come down to northern Nigeria and someone says, oh, I'm an architect and I go to the field, there's nothing like that. To speak also...
Translate.
Okay, now, what kind of woman is this that will wear jeans and go and be dealing with men on the field? She's an architect, for God's sake. And there's nothing that says being an architect is haram. But what it says is that you must be modest in your dressing. You should be modest in your... There's a rich northern... I wish I had enough time to go over it, but there's a rich northern feminist history. Go and do your research. There's a rich Islamic feminist history. Islam is one of the religions that gives you the right as a wife to decide, I don't want to be in a marriage. But what we see now is that it's only a man that can divorce you, but that's not true. Under Sharia, you have the right to decide, look, I'm done. And then negotiation, as she was saying, in a marriage, you have the right to negotiate. The entire concept of marriage in Islam is a contract, which means negotiation. So if I'm not comfortable with something, I have the right to say I'm not doing it again, and I'm not doing anything. But all these things, to speak to her point again, is about erasure of the right thing, and then the female voices.
Thank you. Nana, I feel like you sit at like the intersection of intersection of like the old and the new, so to speak, in the sense that you work with an international organization which has, you know, a lot of OG feminists, as I like to call it, but own major tool of advocacy. And I want to know from your perspective, where do you think we are right now in the feminism landscape?
We're in a really exciting moment. It seems to be entering the, I would say, sort of common consciousness where people are able to speak of feminism. But sometimes I also wonder if people understand right? What it means to be a feminist. So I really just want to start by offering my personal definition of what feminism means. And for me, a feminist is a person who recognizes that we live in a world which has been socially structured in a way to place powerful people over less powerful people. A lot of those powerful people tend to be men, but they're not always men, right? In some context, it would be, let's say in the Western world, right, a white woman might be more powerful than a black man. But in our parts of the world, you would tend to see that the rich, wealthy, powerful people, are the ones who are in power. And so for me, a feminist is a person who recognizes that this is a system, and they recognize that this system is not natural. It doesn't have to be like this, and they work to change it in whichever way, shape, or form they can do that. Some of it could be through writing, some of it could be through speaking, some of it could be through supporting groups of farmers, And for me as well, as a feminist who, in a sense, considers technology a tool, right, because that's what it is, the tool of technology allows me to talk about issues that I believe our society says women shouldn't talk about. And I think, actually, no, I think it's really important for us to talk about it. So that's why I started my blog, to create a community and a space where women could talk about sex and sexualities, because our society says, don't talk about sex, just suddenly get married and have children, and that's the end of it. And I have questions, right? And I want to create spaces where I have those questions. But also, in terms of being online, technology allows me to connect with other feminists. I've come here, and there are so many feminists I'm able to connect with because we see each other on Twitter, we see our tweets, we recognize ourselves. We're like, oh my gosh, so you are this person, and we're recognizing people by their Twitter handles. And so for me, this is part of what we get from feminism today, being able to combine what we do offline in the real world, so to speak, in physical spaces, as well as how we're able to use online technologies to strengthen our movements.
Okay, just to add to what she said, I think in a sense the reason why feminism seems a bit popular now is because, the internet has kind of democratized thoughts. So I can use my platform on Twitter and say what I want to say without any form of censorship. There's no patriarchy there. Nobody can delete my handle.
There is.
No, I know there is, but not in that sense where I would be silenced. Yeah. In a sense where, of course, I would be insulted or called names and stuff like that. By the way, on Twitter, being called a feminist is a badge of honor. I don't consider it an insult. For my people who are here who like to throw that at me, let me just say. But the thing is, because of the way the internet is now, everybody can start their own little movements in their own little corner. All you need is people who identify with what you say. And if what we are saying is such a terrible thing, why are so many women identifying with it? Some of the biggest people on Twitter are feminists. So if what we are saying is rubbish, why are so many women identifying with our struggle?
And men as well, if I may jump in.
Yes, totally.
They are identifying with the struggle because what you said about the internet democratizing information, it also democratizes voice and your ability to say things as they are without fear of anyone. You can't catch me. That's an important one of us. Absolutely. After all. That's a very sweet voice. Thank you for that affirmation, my darling. And so you have less fear. And so things like violence that is always swept under the table can be talked about. And then you see real lives, real people, coming forward and saying, this has happened to me and I want solution. And also because people can see that feminism offers you a very intrepid kind of solution. Things you were afraid of exploring before, it gives it back to you and says, but it's always belonged to you. The right to say no, for example. And I think that is why feminism now becomes your very important alternative way of thinking, of seeing things and being as well.
Now, due to this democratization, we also speak of we're having multiple voices. It also means that we're having people talking about different things that affect and how life affects them in different ways and sharing that. And so, as a result, there's people that we're fighting or trying to dismantle patriarchy, not just at a macro level, say through policy, education, all these really grand themes, but even in everyday sexism, in the home, in everyday relationships. and all of those sorts of things. So it's a micro and macro. However, one of the interesting things I've noticed on the internet is those things are now pitted against each other. So people are saying, why are you talking about opening doors or not closing doors, or pounding yam or not pounding yam, you know, when you should be talking about FGM and rape and domestic violence, you know, and that sort of thing. So I want to know sort of your thoughts, because those arguments are not just happening, say, as a resistance just from men, but also from other women as well, and other feminists as well, who are in many ways sort of policing what people should speak about. So, Nana?
So your question is why...
I mean, what do you, like the idea that people are saying, you know, the micro versus the macro, as opposed to the fact that we can address, you know, different aspects of the issues that affect us all under this sort of banner of feminism?
I mean, I think you've said it, right? For me, it's actually about seeing the interconnection of struggles, right? And so for me, as a feminist, personally, and I think this is where I've grown in my feminist journey, I'm not always only interested in looking at how issues affect like a group that I belong to, but groups that I don't belong to, right? Like, when I first identified as a feminist, I never used to understand the issue of sex worker rights. But actually, when I recognized that when I go into a hotel and the waiter is looking at me funny and ignoring me because he thinks I'm a sex worker, I realized that rights of sex workers are important, right? So for me, it's about thinking about who are the most marginalized, who are the most oppressed. And actually, all of these issues are important, and we can speak about them all of the time, right? It's important to speak about ending female genital mutilation. It's also important to speak about women being able to, you know, to keep her name, to be whoever she wants to be, to love whoever she wants to love. All of these issues are important. I think individual feminists have a right to speak and choose which subjects they feel most passionate about and what they want to advocate about, but there's space for all of us to talk about all of our issues. And really, you know, for me, you identify people that you have common agendas with, and you work with them to address that particular issue. And for me, there's nothing that's macro or micro. You know, one of the common expressions that feminists like to use is the personal is political. Because somebody would say, because it's happening to you in your home, it's not a big deal. The thing that's happening to you in the home is the biggest deal of all, right? There's no such thing as a micro issue for me. Everything is actually really important and really connected.
I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't agree more with that. And, you know, at the heart of the whole conversation is power and how we use or don't use power. And a lot of the time, the challenge that we have with the right, it can happen in an association, in the family, So I had a child who used to come from school singing, "Mommy in the kitchen cooking rice and daddy in the something doing something." I don't remember that song now because I don't want to remember that song. And I said to him, "But you know that's not what happens in our house, right?" He said, "Yes, I know, Mommy, but this is what I was taught." And the next day, I had a bilateral with the teacher. I had to. I didn't go to fight her. I went to make her see the way she was limiting the imagination of the children she was meant to teach them and to open up their minds. And you're not even looking at the reality and showing them that these are the new pathways to influence that you need to pay attention to. And so imagine that was a school. And at the end of the day, I became the annual mother who came to talk about the rights of... I mean, it was extra work, but it was worthwhile work. Now, what am I trying to say here? It matters that we speak up in every space where we find ourselves, micro or macro. It matters that as feminists or as friends of feminists or as feminists becoming, depending on how you name yourself, state at the national level, because whenever the state fails to provide services, what happens? Women have to subsidize the state. They have to do more, whether it is water, whether it's electricity, whether it's security, name it, whatever it is. The women and the children would always have to find a plan B and a plan C. Now, what space into the micro space? And they would carry the disappointment from the micro into the macro. If a woman is battered every day and she goes to work, the employer had better be concerned because she cannot be productive. She is really the same person who is crossing all these, so-called barriers. And so in our analysis of feminism, we really have to look at power and confront it wherever, and whatever form that it might be, wherever it might be.
No, I just wanted to say, and I know I might be battered for this, but it's a safe space. Let me just say that I don't consider cooking a feminist issue. Having to deal with the things that I see every day as a job, I don't consider those things feminist issues. If you ask me personally, I think you should be able to feed yourself. And the problem I have with those kind of debates online is that it takes away from the main issues. Let me use my own constituency as an example. As a northern Nigerian woman, they are more like just surviving as a woman is a feminist thing. The fact that I was just born female. Because everything I want to do in my life, I've had to fight for it. To just have somebody sit down and listen to me. People go into meetings in living rooms to decide about your life without you being there. Those are feminist issues. We have people who are being mutilated, genitally mutilated. Those are feminist issues. We have women who are dying at home because husbands will not let them go to the hospital and have a baby and do antenatals. That's a feminist issue. But when you bring things as petty as who's going to cook and who is going to clean the house and whether you should keep your name, blah, 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 I just feel like you take away from the main problems. You know, you don't have that luxury of saying who's going to cook. When you're struggling, that let them allow you just go to the hospital and give birth in peace.
I'm so glad that Fatima has brought this into the room.
Please don't beat me.
No, who am I? You're a darling younger sister.
No, but I'm telling you because my mommy is here.
Oh, is it Lola or my sister? No, she's there. Okay. Oh, no. You're very protected. And I'm glad you brought this out because I think this is the stuff that generational dialogues must be made of. And that this is where we bring in our different worldview and our lived reality. And from my own experience, which is what I'm humbly offering this afternoon, is that when you begin to ignore the little, then the little becomes the bigger. Then the bigger becomes the biggest. Then the biggest becomes the killer. And we almost ask ourselves, where is our starting point? For me, engaging with women's human rights as a feminist is actually a continuum. What do I mean? Some of us are very far along the line in terms of our understanding and the way we apply it. And some are coming to ask you and saying, what are the signposts? What are the things I need to know? So I'll give you an example of working with young girls. I would teach a young girl how to negotiate before she gets married. I'm not going to teach her to go and read the Quran. I'm Muslim, right? You can apparently tell that. And I have a lot of respect for Islam because it's the interpretation that is the problem. It's not the text per se. I would not tell her, go and read the Quran because that would be like passing the book. I would tell her the ABC things of a signpost of what she needs to negotiate. I would encourage her, if she can, to sign a contract. Not that the goalpost cannot shift, but that there's certain tenets that you have to hold each other accountable to. Accountability matters. So that if you're in a relationship and you find yourself holding the heavier side of the stick, you can tell there is a problem. I agree with that, cooking is a mundane thing. It should not matter. But when a man can go to a hotel and earn an income as a chef, and the same man comes back to his home, and he tells the woman who has been slaving all day, come and get in the kitchen and get me that pounded yam, I have a problem. Cooking becomes an issue. Cooking becomes a feminist issue. When a man says to the woman, this is my son, I don't want him in the kitchen. That's my daughter, I don't want her climbing trees. How is she going to be the architect and the engineer if she doesn't know how to do vertical from a young age? I will have an issue with that. So I think what we owe each other is not to attempt to swap our lived reality with each other, and I hear you loud and clear, and you're very right, but it's for us to be able to share the broad spectrum of what could be, and to teach ourselves and each other how we look out for the signpost of danger so that we begin to avoid them before it gets to bigger things like saying the woman must give birth to the baby in the house even though she's been laboring forever, and the kind of maternal mortality rate that we have in this country. And by the way, the national average is actually deceptive. The northeast figure is about 1,500. So when they tell you 500 women die in childbirth, it's actually deceptive, like averages usually are. So it depends on where we are standing. What is your worldview?
I've been schooled.
Okay, one of the things about just being a woman is that our bodies are politicized. Whether it's clothing, whether it's who we are, our sexuality, everything about our bodies, is pretty much politics. Nana, you run a blog that deals with African women's sexuality. And I want you to share, what your experiences have been in terms of receiving entries and the kind of stories that you share. A lot of people are still anonymous on that as well, which I find quite interesting. So I want you to speak on that in relation to feminism and to being an African woman as well.
Okay. I think I also want to speak and maybe start and provide a frame for this conversation by sharing part of my motivation for starting the blog, which was realizing that it took until I was almost 30 years old to actually be in a space where I was having open, frank conversations with other women about sex and sexuality and not feeling judged and feeling actually able to be open to say, well, I'd like to try this. Have you ever done this? How was it? And I was like, oh my God, why has it taken me so long to have this kind of conversation? And I was reflecting on my own childhood, and really the non-existent sex education that I got. In Ghana, when I was growing up, there was a very popular TV show called Osofodazi. People like Kina will know it. And Osofodazi, Osofo means pastor, right? And you watch the TV show, and there will always be a schoolgirl. And the schoolgirl will fall pregnant, and she'll drop out of school, and her life will be miserable. And my mom will say, have you seen? This is what happens with girls who play with boys. And I was terrified. I remember when I first got my period, I had my period for a few months, and then I didn't have my period. I went to a boarding school, which was a Catholic boarding school. I started to go to the convent every day. I was praying because I thought I was pregnant. I knew nothing about sex, right? I remember coming back to school after a long vacation, and, over the long vacation, I had grown boobs, and people were like, she was having sex, and everybody was talking about me. I also used to do the same thing. I also used to talk about a girl who fell pregnant and dropped out of school. And I thought, why was I so misinformed? Why did I not know the basics of life? And I felt it was really important for us to have space as women to talk about these issues, right? We talk about sexuality. I feel like a lot of people on the continent like to pretend that, everybody's straight. I know it's a lie. I did not know that I didn't know lesbians were women who slept together, but in my girls' boarding school, a lot of us girls used to sleep together all of the time. It was only when I went abroad, I was like, oh, did that mean when I was in school I was also a lesbian? I had no idea, right? So for me, the blog is a space where you talk about anything that's concerned with sex, sexuality, and there is no subject that's off limits because we need to actually talk and discuss.
I'm also interested in why a lot of people are still very anonymous on that.
I completely understand why people are anonymous. I made a conscious choice not to be anonymous, but I also know that there are consequences to this. So, for example, I have political aspirations. I have actually seen, parliamentary screenings where they are questioning women about, the fact that they are not married and they have a child. And my skeletons are on the internet. You don't even have to go into a closet and look for it. So, of course, this is why people are anonymous. I've had a woman write to me and say, can you please delete this comment I wrote on the blog? Because I went for an interview, and she was writing to me from the States, and they said to her, were you the one who made this comment on the blog? Yes. So there are real consequences for people actually choosing just to be themselves and just to be open and honest and to ask questions. So I completely understand why people are anonymous. I mean, I work in a feminist organization, so it's easy for me as well to be anonymous, right? It doesn't impact my livelihood. But for people who are...
Chatting about this, was it yesterday or so, when I said I'm very interested in, these sexual rituals of northern women, and we're talking about, Kayamata and so many...
my mom is here.
Mommy, this is purely political.
Can somebody
panel.
distract her?
And so, of course, we were both talking about these things. Of a very sort of policing.
Visceral need to control a woman and her needs and her desires and whatnot. In northern Nigeria, when you're a young girl, nobody tells you these things. Just like probably you just know that if you mess around with boys, that is, maybe you play football with boys, you will end up pregnant. And nothing ever happens to the boy who gets you pregnant. You're always the victim. So, of course, we all grew up not wanting to get pregnant, then you get married. And there's a huge disconnect because once you get married, everybody starts bringing concussions to your house. Yes, they start bringing Dorot, turare for you to, it's a kind of steaming of your, okay, yeah, okay. And then they bring, of your womanhood.
With spices and sandalwood and, you
yes,
know.
I'll show you later. I'm joking. And then they start telling you should supposed to make you very, you know, like active and all that. And northern Nigerian men, they are a very peculiar brand of men because the things that they frown out, like outside, are the things that they value. Yeah, yes, those are the things they desire. So they like a woman who is very sensual. They want a woman who is really a woman. Let me say it like that. My mother is here.
She has given us permission for the day. Don't worry about Mom.
So, but then when you are acting out these things outside the control of like a marriage, of course, there are problems. And even those that are married, you see that they want a woman who is sensual. It's very important to them. So that's why you have these underground things of say me and take this. There's one that is called bomb oil. I'm yet to. Are you? I don't know how to translate that. The oil is supposed to make you to make you look as desirable as possible. You know, your skin glows. Yes, and then you are always reaching out for a man. Let me put it that way. By the way, I know all this information not from any like. Wait. Let me explain now. You know, because, you know, I told you, wait.
Fatima runs a women's program. So she needs to be aware.
Listen to me. In my work as a producer for a women's program on the BBC, that's where I learned all these things. My mother never taught me, disclaimer. And even when I got married, I didn't know these things, you know. It was later, you know, cousins will show you, oh, you should try this. This is the reaction you get. I didn't try, anyway. But with my work on Adikwa Zamani, I had to talk to people who, you know, this knowledge has been passed down since the 1800s. This knowledge is not something new. But then with the coming of the internet now, especially Instagram, you have people who have commercialized it. It used to be like a secret knowledge of Fulani and Kanuri women, you know. Married women. Yes, thank you, Ada. It's supposed to actually be, like I said, these are the things that northern Nigerian men want in a wife. And the contradiction of it is that you spend so much time, especially Kanuri women, you spend so much time preparing yourself, you know, perfuming yourself and doing your hair and smoothing your skin. It's so exhausting. And all of it is not for your own satisfaction or pleasure or desire. All of it is to please somebody who does not, probably he showers twice a month or something, you know. And I'm always complaining about this. This side of the world, they are bad people. So to go back to your question, this need to police our bodies and our sexuality, as it were. Yes, of course, because as Muslims, we're only allowed to express our sexuality within the confines of a marriage, which is fine. But you find that you spend so much, and these things are expensive, by the way, Wana, they are really expensive. So when you spend all this money, you spend all this time for like 5-10 minutes for somebody to just grunt and go, I think it's unfair.
Very unfair.
Wait, so you guys, calm down, everybody, calm down.
Relax.
Calm down.
Next year we'll do a panel on Kaya matters.
Exactly. So,
Let me
Dr.
just
Amina
say-
wants to say something.
Let me just say that. Well, and you know,
Yes.
Fatima, this is not to tease you further, but you're a very good advertisement for exactly what you described.
Okay, I have good genes, and I'm part Kanuri and part Fulani.
And that
Does that
explains
clear
it.
that?
But let me just bring this back a little bit again into our consciousness. Because you know what Fatima just described was quite, intriguing. And for me, the most critical thing is that you're doing all of these things not for you, not because of you, but because of someone who doesn't think that he should have also developed his own, erotic skills in terms of how he should please a partner. Because he thinks his duty is really to procreate. And this is the thing that society holds, in high esteem. The ability of a woman to be a reproductive vessel. And that is what we need to challenge. To say that there is no contradiction, there's nothing to be ashamed of. If, as a human being, I want sex and I enjoy sex and I demand for sex, whether I'm male or female, it doesn't matter. It's a human right. Oh yeah, brothers, don't laugh. Because it's part of what makes me happy, what makes me feel complete, what makes me feel fulfilled. And we do not want to talk about it, yet again, because it is in the interest of society to control that particular function. The very day you know that you have options, that's the day you rebel, and that's the day they lose control. It's a very simple patriarchal tool. And so this then takes me to, so what are the things we should do as feminists? And I'm going to link this back to what Nana said, about creating that safe space. It's very important that we look at different tools and different strategies depending on who the audience is and what we mean to communicate. And I think we need to ask ourselves the question, therefore, at this critical moment in the conversation, how are we raising our boys? What kind of men will they grow up to become? If we focus on working with girls and we make our girls into very self-assured people who are able to negotiate, and our boys are the same old pack up, with all due respect to the good brothers in the room, then you ask, what exactly have we done? Second is, how are we working to break this down? So I'm sure a lot of the colleagues in the room understand where we're coming from. Lola said, I don't even have to break it down to you because you know why this conversation is important. So what about those out there who do not understand the importance of this conversation? What will we do about not breaking down the wall, but at least knocking at the door and getting it to open a bit ajar and for us to go in? My very first feminism class, about 2 decades ago, was one in which we're all challenged to ask ourselves, what is the local name for the vagina? Yeah, I have to say it as it is. That's why I'm feminist. Sorry if I'm offending anybody. Baby, well, thank you very much, Lola. I'm protected. Some of us knew what the name for the vagina was. Yeah, surprisingly, yeah. And then when it came to the clitoris, oh, a whole lot of us did not know what the clitoris meant. And really, when it comes down to brass tacks, it's not about the vagina, it's about the clitoris. Because that is really where you feel or you do not feel. And that is what is targeted. I'm saying this because, I have a lot of researchers and thinkers in the room. Do not take my word for it. Go do your own research. But again, let me go back to where I am. Sorry, my darling moderator. It's important for us to think about the strategies and the audience because one size will not fit all. It's equally important for us to write our own stories and to bring our voices into the room, and that is why I respect the work that my sisters and the story. A story is meant to be told. Somebody else will seize that experience and they will reinterpret it for you. And when they do, it's a whole lot more difficult to reclaim that space and say, no, but that's not what it is. This is what it is. The train has already left the station. So it's better for us to be in the first class coach and driving the agenda rather than waiting to be invited. Sometimes you do not wait to be told what to do. You do it because it needs to be done.
Can I just, 1 minute? Okay. Just to tie into what you said about this body and what we need to do. One of the reasons why we started Adiko was to do that kind of thing, to give space to that kind of discussion. And about 2 or 3 weeks ago, some of you may have heard, those who were following the program, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I decided that I wanted to get women together, because everywhere I go, northern women talk to me like, when are you going to do a show about how unsatisfied we are in our marriages? And our men, they like to carry their shoulders up. Oh, we are polygamists, we are super lovers, we are Mr. Lover, all those things. So I got about 4 or 5 women, and we just sat down in a room. If you see how we even did it, as if we were going for a drug deal, and we were hiding, and people were lying, and then they went and they said these things. Oh, the person, and you know, of all the stories, the most common theme was that the person does not care about my own fulfillment as a woman, which is also very wrong. And they said, oh, you can't air this is crazy. We went ahead and aired it. And you need to see the backlash that we received. They almost took it off air, thank God they didn't. But the backlash that came back was primarily also from men who thought that it was not the place of a woman to say when she was fulfilled or not. And this is 2018, ladies and gentlemen. So I agree with you, we need to own the driver's seat and be in first class and push it. Maybe if enough women said it, people will start taking notice of it.
Lola, I think the next year we need to have a panel called Sex is a Feminist Issue. We have up to 5 minutes. I'm just going to go to one more question before we go to the audience. Dr. Amina talked about, how important Amina talked about how important documentation is. And I think something that the internet has done has been visibility for feminism. And of course, there's a hyper-visibility that's going on right now. Something that's also coming out of that is commercialization. Or some people say, feminism for coins. As well. I want to know from your perspective, is there a danger in that, or is every kind of hyper-visibility, whether it's...
I mean, I think visibility is really, really important, right? And I think part of what social media has allowed is for those people who do not have access to like mainstream media platforms to create their own platforms. I don't think I really understand the subject of feminism for coins. So I almost feel like the critique in that is if you're a feminist, you shouldn't get paid for being a feminist. But some of us actually work in feminist organizations, so we get paid for being a feminist. So I guess in that case, I fall into the camp of feminism for coins, but I'm not working in a feminist organization because I want to get money, right? I want to do a job that aligns with my values, that enables me to contribute to creating the kind of world I want to live in, and it's great to get paid for that, right? But I also really appreciate and value the millions of activists who do their activism daily without, any resources, and I'd actually like to advocate for them to also somehow be paid for their labor, and I think that's really important. So, yeah.
I wish we had more time because I still wanted to talk about solutions, but unfortunately we have run out. Can we? Okay. 10 more minutes, thank you. So in terms of solutions, because it's always easy to bring up all the problems and all the issues, one of the tools I know has always been deployed is enlightened self-interest in terms of getting men on board or getting men involved, or some people wanting to appeal to men in terms of feminism. Is that still a way forward, or do we need to find other approaches?
I think because we live in a society where, it's not just women, it's not just feminists. We have to learn to get along. And I don't think feminism denies the fact that, the male has a role to play. And sometimes when patriarchy strikes, it doesn't just affect women, it also affects men. I mean, look at the way it treats masculinity and the fact that a man who wants just to be a good person, to take care of his home, is then vilified. Or, a silly thing like, why are you crying? Be a man. You shouldn't cry and all of that. I mean, let them cry. After the rain, these things get a whole lot clearer. And so we need allies. This is the fact of the matter. And we must choose our allies carefully. It's the only thing I usually say. We shouldn't lose track of the agenda. And really, men who want to work with women do not, go in front. They support the women. They do not seize the space or the agenda. They enable the agenda. And so sometimes when you hear men speak about, issues that affect women, it can be very powerful when they're speaking from a perspective of knowledge, of passion, of true concern, especially when they're in a place to make a difference. Otherwise, why are we engaging the state? we need to work with men. I would agree with you, but we must keep control of the agenda. And for me, before we get to talk about men, I have to go back to what I said earlier. We need to, first of all, resolve the contradiction between our sons and our daughters. And I say this because, you know, every one of us is either a biological or a social mother or father. And so we all have children, therefore, by extension. And in a context where we enable opportunities for one against the other, we're already creating an uneven playing field, so as it were. And that is why affirmative action becomes important. A few years ago, we tried to pass the Violence Against Persons Bill in this country. By the way, it took us like 18 years to do that. The reason that I know is that the baby that I went into labor became Violence Against Persons Act. The very first time that it came before the National Legislature or National Assembly, it failed by like 70% to 30%, so 30% voted. The next time it went before the House, we had a kind of 55-45. You get what I'm driving at? We're getting there. And eventually it got passed. How did it get passed? Every day, the Coalition on Violence Against Women will send a text message. We didn't have all the, you know, sophisticated social media we had now, but they would send a text message to a legislator to tell her or him about what rape has done to the life of a girl today, about why a woman who has been beaten today does not feel her personhood is protected, about why this community that is, you know, that kind of thing. So we were building the momentum. A majority are men. We've only ever made 7% women representation at parliament in Nigeria. Right now it's at 5%. So you see why we need men. But we have to help them build the knowledge, build the institutions that they need to have, and work side by side with them, but with a clear view about this. Gender is a strategy, but it's about women at the end of the day.
I think the solution is two-pronged. There are times when you would need to confront the patriarchy, which is my favorite, and then there's a time to also educate. But you see, the problem is in a setting like Nigeria, the only way forward is to confront. Malam taught me something, that the only way you can make progress is through conflict. So when somebody is doing anyhow, you have to confront the patriarchy. Why are you doing this? Why are you punishing women for being women? I didn't choose to be born a girl. So why are you punishing me for my gender by excluding me from opportunities, by excluding me from having a full life, just because I was born a girl? I didn't have a say in the matter. So why am I being punished? And that is a lot of the work we do online, because there it's very easy to spot the ones that are mad. They'll come at you and say, yes, because there are people. Last year at Kabafest, I had this experience. After the panel, someone came to, before my panel, someone came to tell me how, you know, it was so disgraceful what I was doing and blah, blah, blah. But you have to confront it. You have to make people uncomfortable enough for them to want a change. And it's also, that confrontation would also be to confront toxic masculinity. My good friend Umar Turaki, earlier in the day, he was talking about crying. And it was so profound or groundbreaking or what for a man to sit down on a public panel like this and say that, yes, I cry. It's a powerful thing. Because we don't expect men to cry, we don't expect men to be loving, we don't expect men to be affectionate, because those are feminine qualities, you know? So me personally, I prefer that you confront people enough to see the inequality, to see the unfairness, and make them uncomfortable enough for them to want to change it.
Nana?
I mean, I would say for myself, gender is really about centering women and people who don't actually conform to this dichotomy of male-female, right? There are some people who don't identify strictly in these kind of boxes that we like to use a lot. And I really believe in actually working with those who are from the more marginalized groups and really just sort of centering and working with women. I don't feel like we're in a situation where boys are suffering or men are being excluded. I agree, you know, that for me, feminists are people, which includes men. I think men who are feminists would really be aware of their own power and privilege. You know, like Amina said, they wouldn't try and grab the stage, they'll try and support. For me, some of the best ways can be to support movements of women, with your finances, with your time, you know, with your energy. I sometimes get concerned when I see like large organizations like UN Women running schemes like He for She. You know, I'm aware of feminists campaigning for years for there to be an agency for women, and the first campaign they run is He for She. For me, that kind of feels like a bit of a slap in the face, because one of the things that I'm aware of is that this beast that we call patriarchy, you know, it's very smart. It will shift, and change, and it will say, oh, now you are forgetting about the boys. I don't think the girls are so far ahead, and we're not forgetting about the boys. You know, women care about everybody. Yes. They care about the community. So in focusing on girls, it doesn't mean you're excluding boys. You know, and for me as well, everybody can do their own education. I, as a feminist, I don't feel the responsibility to educate any man. I educated myself about feminism, and I think men who are out there can also choose to educate themselves.
All right, so we will take some questions. Please, questions in the comments. Kadiri Ahmed in front. Anybody with a microphone? Please make them questions, ladies and gentlemen. Short, we don't have time.
Hi. Okay, so often when we talk about patriarchy, I think even if we touch on the question of religion, we never really fully, grapple with it. I personally believe that the Abrahamic religions, which is Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, are designed specifically to promote men over women. Now, we can have conversations, about whether it is the interpretation, but the reality of the way they exist today. And in many ways, part of the tragedy is those of us of faith sometimes buy into the stories because, like she said, the system is clever and it will change. So the example, for example, that Fatima gave as an indication of Islam being, pro-women, that a man, for example, pays a woman to breastfeed her kid. That takes away a woman's right as a parent. It's saying that children belong to their father and their father alone. So for me, there are problematic things in the way we sometimes even try to represent religion, because there's a fear to confront these things head on, because there are consequences. But until we begin to actually ask these questions and dismantle these things, then we're going to continue to have issues. So that's just my comment.
I think we have one there, and then we'll take one at the back. Okay, just take.
Yes, thank you very much. Hi, my name is Timei. My question is about how any ideas that you have about translating online feminist movements. You mentioned the popularity that feminism has among young women in the digital space. And Amina has experience with feminist organizing. So I was wondering if you have any ideas that you can share with us about ways to effectively translate our digital activism into offline work in the ways that your generation has done that, and also how young feminists who have this energy and enthusiasm can connect to the feminist organizing that's being done at the international level, like where you work, and also at the national level in trying to get laws changed to better benefit women.
Chinyere? Timei, I'm sorry. Excellent question. The work that I have done predated, digital opportunity. And so it's been more of the reverse for me. How do I then take it from offline, online, and then link both? But the question you've asked is pertinent. And if I can use that experience, I would say that we should remain conscious of how we are being inclusive. If you do that, you know that there's still some people who don't have access to technology, and they can't find you. And you have to find them, which means you have to go to them. Second is, when you want to work with people who are not quite the online savvy kind of people, you find that you need to have different kinds of approaches. So that is where you really come against the issue of the time poverty facing women. Women's time is always very little and very precious. So how do you organize with them? At what point in time do you get them? Where do you find them the most? Is it at the markets? You know, is it on the farm? Is it at the antenatal clinics? You've got to ask these questions. Third is the fact that they do not have that kind of worldview you have of analytics and reapplying it to reality and coming up with new imaginations. You must start with the standpoint of, what is it that matters most to them? What is that thing that when you say it to them, it will resonate, and then you do other things? One of our projects is around voice and accountability. That is what we call it. But we started by enabling women that they had to run it. They had to make sure that everyone paid back for another person to get the money. Then they had to know that the money should never run out. What does that mean? You've got to have advocacy skills. You've got to know where to go find other resources, how to work with very little money to get a whole lot going. And because the issue mattered to them, and they were doing it themselves with the support that they needed to have, that has begun to transform lives. Over 1,000 women right now in Kaduna North Senatorial District of this state is where we have actually pioneered this. And the fourth and final thing I'll say about working offline is that you have to keep thinking about low-cost, high-impact approaches. Because, you know, the spread is suddenly wider. You don't have that opportunity of everybody, you know, like a centripetal kind of force that pulls everything together. It's all diffused. So how do you then use the little resource you have to achieve a whole lot more? And then you see, I'm coming back in a back doorway to technology again. You can use the phones. You can get women having access to the kind of basic e-banking that can also be very exciting to them, but also links them without you burning out. It is new, it is strategic, it gives women control. But finally, the most important thing is feedback. We should never assume that we understand another person's lived reality. It's always been a very humbling thing for me. Once upon a time, we were working with young girls, and we thought the things that should matter to them was known to us so-called elderly ones. And when we asked the girls, they said, no, all they want to learn is how to do makeup. I mean, who were we to say that wasn't important to them at that point in their lives? And we're like, makeup, really? And we're like, all right, this is what they want, get it to them. And it was through the makeup thing that they formed a community. They could discuss with each other all of the issues that we're talking about, the so-called toxic issues here. So if we hadn't listened to them, we would have even missed the boat on our own agenda. Do you want me to talk to Kadria's point, or you want to say? Oh, okay. My sister Kadria, we're always between a rock and a hard place. And there's no space that is ever perfect. There's no text that does not have its own contradictions. Even in the feminist movement, we still have our arguments about, are there boundaries? Where do you draw the line? Especially when you come to, LGBT issues. It's a very dicey. But what I've always learned as a feminist is that you must be very careful not to judge, especially when you don't have the total picture of a thing. If someone has a particular belief, I want to understand that belief a whole lot better. So what am I saying? I'm heterosexual, right? But I have lesbian friends. And I'm not going to question their reality because I don't understand it enough to judge. I'm just saying. And I don't think it makes me less of a Muslim because the Quran doesn't even give me the right to judge anyone. I do not understand what's happening with them biologically or socially or mentally for them to want to be that way. They probably also don't understand why I'm the way that I am. Now, the reason why I said we need to pay attention to interpretation is because every morning I read the Quran, and I read it with a very interesting new eye. And I tell, my friends, do not read it in Arabic. You can read it in Arabic, very good, tick the box. That's not what it is about. Read it in a language that you understand. And then you begin to see that even where you go to Surah Nisa, which is a whole chapter on the rights of women, and you go to the verse that says men can marry more than one, it will start by saying marry for just between or amongst them. You will never hear that if you can be just. The men will just come and say, but we can marry for, we can do that. The second thing for me about religion, or maybe that's the third thing, is that religion itself is dynamic. It's a function of the lived reality of a people and their particular need at a particular point in their history.
There's a context.
Once upon a time, we had slavery. Remember, we had slavery. Today, slavery in itself is questioned. And nobody remembers that once upon a time it was accepted. Whether it was Judaism or Christianity or Islam, it was the norm. Now, my sister, I don't want you to be a bilateral. Sorry, but you know, I see the point you're making is what I'm trying to say. But we also have to, as much as possible, try to just stand back and ask ourselves, is there more to what we see? Is there more that we need to understand? Are there other worldviews that we do not understand? I am feminist, I'm Muslim, I'm proud of those two identities. I do not see a contradiction between those two. Fatima.
I was going to say...
Fatima, sorry. Okay. Just to quickly say something. The issue, and I think maybe my point wasn't clearly made, the issue I was making about religion is that those interpretations that you're talking about were in a space where they are not even allowed. The questioning isn't allowed. So you get people who would sort of, again, to come back to Fatima's example of, you know, the fact of a man paying a woman to pay for her child is sort of put out as this sort of manifestation of the liberal nature of Islam. But even in Islam, there is room for jurisprudence that says we should be interpreting religion according to the time. The last time that happened in Islam was 400 years ago with the four Imams, Maliki, Hanafi, Shafi'i. In 400 years, nobody has been allowed to sit down and relook at Islam with the realities of today. So, for example, on the issue of inheritance, when during the time of the Prophet, women went from their father's house to their husband's house, and if anything happened to the husband, they came back to their father's house where their brothers looked after them. So inheritance was divided, you know, in such a way that a woman would always have less. We now have women who are breadwinners. Where is the interpretation which is looking again at inheritance? And the question, the point I'm trying to make, and this doesn't apply only to Islam, okay? The point I'm trying to make, please, if I can talk. Okay. Please, if I can talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
If I can talk. The point I'm trying to make is, as you can hear from the noise in the room, is that we are not allowed to ask these questions and raise these issues without our faith being questioned. If you go to church, if you go to church, because I go to church, I have Christian friends and I've had occasion to go to church with them. The similarity is uncanny in the way the two religions actually trust women. The same pastors will stand there and tell you how it is unchristian for you not to submit totally to your husband, regardless of the interpretation. And so I'm saying, fundamentally, there's a hijacking of the Abrahamic religions to give men a superiority and a power that allows them to oppress women.
And then let me just clarify something.
That is what
let me just clarify something.
Very quickly.
No, I need to do this
yes,
right now.
Let Fatima respond very quickly, and
I think you misunderstood
we've run out of time.
The reason why I brought out those examples. Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we please calm down? We have also run out of time, so I can't even take any more questions. Just to let you know. Hey. I wish I could manufacture more time, but I can't. So we will have the discussion off camera.
Are we going to get a chance to wrap up?
Yes, so please, can Fatima just respond very quickly? One house, please. Thank you. So please, just go ahead.
Okay, the reason why I said in the beginning, I said Islam is a feminist religion. Yes, maybe the reality is different, but it is also the religion that I know of, that I understand. I can't speak for other Abrahamic faiths, but I do know that there's a reason for everything and there's a context for everything. By no means am I claiming to be a scholar, and it is my mistake. I should have provided some context when I was giving those examples. For instance, the example my big sister gave of inheritance being twice the share for men, half for men. The reason is simple. At the time when when those things came up, the jurisprudence behind it, but I'm also a lawyer, so I also have quite a deep understanding of the Sharia. The reason why it's there is because, yes, women could work, women could own property under Islam, but the man was expected to always look out for her. That is why he always had a higher share. While I don't hold brief for that, but there's a reason why at that time it became like that, and I did things. For instance, now there's homosexuality that's rampant in the Muslim community. That wasn't 400 years ago. We need to know, where do we stand? We need to know what is the ruling. No, rampant. Sorry, okay. Queer, being queer, is that the word? No. Sorry. It's called, it's out of Arab culture, actually, because in Arab culture, they prefer to have wet nurses for their babies instead of the mother breastfeeding. And under Sharia law, the primary custodian of a child is still the mother. Anywhere you go where there's a custody problem in a Sharia court, primary custody is to a mother. So I just needed to explain that. Yes, I do agree we should be able to review certain things.
We have run out of time. You know, as you know, it's Friday. We're running late already.
Yes,
so,
we are.
Well, thank you all very much.
And what a great panel.
Oh, my goodness. But
do you know the panel we're going to have next year? We have to... Oh, Kina, you will not let me rest. Kina, I'm giving you 30 seconds.
Wait, what did we say about centering women in the conversation?
It's a feminist panel.
Excuse me.
All right, please.
I just want to say that in all of your explanations, we are still failing, and I'm glad my sister Kadeya brought up the church, because in Ghana, Christians are undergoing a resurgence in patriarchal religion. And that you can list all the examples of interpretation you want. You are not fundamentally addressing her issue.
Because I'm not equipped to.
No.
I'm not a scholar.
It's not an issue of being equipped to. It's an issue of understanding that there is now dominant power in a certain type of interpretation. You are not addressing her issue to refer people who are not even empowered to do individual interpretation as a response. As feminists, as a feminist response to patriarchal, entrenched religious power, it's not the way to go, because we don't ask women to go and look for individual sources. We address the power structure. And so every time my sister brings this issue up, and it is because of the failure of religious feminism to look up front at what she is saying. You can't refer. Women do not have the power to be doing individual interpretation. And any woman who is doing individual interpretation of religious texts is coming from power. You are empowered, you are powerful, you are privileged, so you can do it. But it doesn't address her issue, and we really, I'm not religious, but I am petrified of Christian fundamental misogyny, patriarchy in Ghana. And so we really need you guys to address this issue and not refer us back to individual examples of what the Quran or the Bible says. The issue is the hijacking of the interpretation.
I really think that, fundamentalism is not new.
I want to apologize to all the wonderful men. Let me tell you what we're going to do. Okay. I'll tell you, right? First of all, this is a feminist panel. Wait. Next year, we're going to have a panel, and it's going to be called Who is Afraid of Feminism?
Yes.
Yeah? Wait. And it's going to be male only. So you will have your space. I'm very interested in what the men have to say. And I think, like somebody said earlier, there's no way we can win this war by ourselves. We need allies, and we need to have men on our side. But we need to have men who are open to understanding issues. We need to have men who are not just going to stand up and say, no, the status quo is what will remain. We have to somehow maintain that. We're human beings, we're not mannequins. Our duty is to evolve. So let's digest what we've heard today, and we will come back and be able to deliver a full response next year. By which time I expect you all to be rabid feminists. Is that fair? Can we do that? I want to take, no wait, I'm taking your own name because you are going to be on that panel. Okay? Do we have a deal? Yeah? So, I'll talk to you later. I'm serious. When I give, you're already a feminist. When I give you my word, it's going to happen. So if you are really interested in responding to what you've heard, hold me. As I'm walking around, I will take your name. We're going to make that panel happen. Yeah? So on that note, because we really do have to move quickly, I would like you all to join me in thanking these unbelievable women. The conversation has been enriching. It has been intelligent. And I think we've all learned a lot. I just want to say thank you to you all. Thank you so much. So while they're taking their photographs,